Hello everyone, welcome back to the bus. Today we're going to be discussing this. This is the air brake system related to the bus. The purpose of this video is to arm you with knowledge so that you can better understand what brake system exists in your bus, as well as can diagnose issues that might arise with it. I by no means claim to be any sort of professional. I hope if anyone finds any issues with what I'm saying and is more experienced with this concept, that you will leave that information down in the comments. This is a community. I'd love to learn and grow. I'm still learning. I went down this rabbit hole because I was having issues releasing my parking brake. Still am. So I did a lot of research to try and figure out how the whole system works so that I could diagnose the issue and hopefully avoid thousands of dollars in mechanic costs. So this is the information that I found, and I hope you guys will find it useful. Now, the first thing that should be said is if your bus has a hydraulic brake system, this video does not make any sense to you. I haven't done any research into those systems, so I don't know how similar or different they are, but I am talking about air brake systems here, so make sure you're only using your time on this video if you have an air brake system. I am on a 2011 Intercontinental CE300 bus. It's about 32 feet long, and it is armed with drum brakes powered by air systems. So let me break that down for you. Essentially, that means that the brakes themselves, the drums, are just brakes that are pushed out. It's literally this inner drum inside the wheel that is pushed out against the inner rim of the wheel to create friction and stop the bus. Now, what is doing that is air pressure. That is what is doing work within the system, right? So you actually have the inner brake itself, which is the drum, and then the air pressure is what is causing that drum to be pushed against or relaxed away from the wheel itself. Now, there are two different ways that this is done within a air brake system. The first one is the parking/emergency brake. That's this guy. By default, this system is engaged, meaning the air brake is engaged. Why is this? This is because the parking/emergency brake is powered by a spring brake. That is what is actually doing the work to push the drum out. When there is no air pressure in the system, by default, that is engaged. When you put air pressure in, that pushes the spring away from the drum, allowing the drum to release, and thus releasing your parking brake. So if you don't have any air pressure in your system, that brake is engaged. On the other hand, your service brake, which is engaged by the pedal, by default is not engaged. That is just relaxed. When you press that service brake, it pushes the drum out using the air pressure and creates that friction, stopping the bus. On my bus, the emergency brake is just on the rear wheels and the service brake is on all four. I don't know if that's the same across all buses. I'm fairly certain it is. But it is important to be aware that it might be different based on bus brand, any number of things. Now we can talk about this. This is the brake valve that manages the airflow between the primary and secondary air supply systems and the air brake lines. So if you look on this actual valve, you'll see two ports here, which is these two here. They say supply 11 and 12. On my bus, that is an orange and a green line. The orange line is the secondary system and the green line is the primary. If you look under your bus, you'll find you have two air compressor tanks. Matches with Air 1 and Air 2 on your dash valves here. So those are redundant air pressure systems. If one fails, you still have a backup. There's plenty of redundancy within the system. Both of those feed into this line. There's then a delivery line. For me, that is yellow on my system, and that is what delivers air to the air brake, the parking brake system, the emergency parking brake system, to the spring brakes. Then there's an exhaust line, and that simply allows air to escape out of the spring brake system and just be vented into the atmosphere. It just gets lost, right? So it just escapes out. So, following the logic of how these spring brakes work from before, right? You have no air in the system, the spring brakes are engaged, you can't move the bus. You have air in the system, the spring brakes are pushed away, you can move the bus. So you've got those two supply lines, right? when you push to release the spring brake, essentially what that's doing is allowing the air from those supply lines to be vented through the delivery line and be sent through the spring brake airline system. So the supply lines then sends air through the spring brake system, pressurizing that system, releasing the spring brakes. When you pull it, then that allows the air to escape out the exhaust, and thus there's no more pressure in the spring brake system and the spring brakes are engaged again. When I went to troubleshoot this, what I found was I was not getting any air to these supply lines, either of them. They were both depressurized. Because of that, there was no way that I was ever going to get air into my spring brake system, and I was never going to be able to release that. Now we can take this information, go into the hood, and let's look at all the air pressure lines to see exactly how we're getting in and out of this system. Okay, here we are in the hood of the bus, and I'm going to try and go through and explain all of these in depth so that you can see exactly what's going on. Now, a couple of things to note. We've got a color code on these lines. I don't know if this is going to be the same on your bus, but it theoretically should be. If you have an intercontinental bus, they are standardized. It should be the same, but if it's not, just use the positions of where things are going in to figure out what your color code actually is. Now, on my bus, we've got green here is our primary supply line coming from the primary air tank. Orange is the secondary line coming from the secondary tank. Yellow is my spring brake system, and then black is exhaust. Well, black is exhaust in some places. Black is just a general catch-all. Coming out of my actual valve, it's exhaust. Here, it's something else. So, let's trace this around. You can see here these two thicker green and orange lines coming up here. They feed into my brake themselves. Then they tee off. You can see right here, right? So this feeds into that pedal brake, tees off up here, and enters this valve system. The same thing happens with this green line. You can see that tee there that feeds up into here. From here, it feeds down into there. That supplies the valve, and that supplies the air brake valve. This is coming out of the air brake valve and going down into the spring brake system. This comes out of the air brake valve from that T and feeds into this. This system right here, this is, if I can get a good angle on it. All right, this black line here, you can see that there? That is a tee off coming from the delivery to the pedal brake system. So you can see that green line there that I'm wiggling around. That is going to my brake. Same with this orange. But teeing off of that green system, that primary system here, you can see this black line that feeds into this valve, and that valve also goes up into here. So let me climb up here and we can explain what's happening in this system. So, as I said, these two lines here, if you look closely right there, you can see that says supply, right? So this line is supplying this valve. This line here is delivery from this valve, right? So these two orange lines coming from the tee off from the tank is going into this valve, and then coming out of this valve and going into the actual valve. So I know there's a lot of valves going on, but the actual push button, we'll call that the brake release button. So from the air tanks through this valve, through this line to the brake release button. Same thing on the secondary system. Now you can see from the pedal brake, that shared T, it sends pressure through this, goes up here. Now what's happening here, these valves are by default closed. So if you're not pressing the brake, if there's no air coming in through here, these valves are closed. So you won't get air pressure into that brake release valve, which means you can't engage you can't release your spring brakes. If you put pressure, it sends air through here, tees it off to both of these, opens both of these valves, and you can then release your spring brake. by pushing that button and sending air down this line. When air is sent down this line, it also sends air here. This also acts as a check valve. So it sends air here as well, tees off, and then keeps this open so that there's air constantly being delivered to that line. Hopefully that makes sense, right? So essentially, air comes into these, air pressure comes either from the spring brake or the pedal brake, keeps this open, allows air to be delivered to the brake release, which then directs air to the spring brakes. Okay? Now, the other part of this valve right here, this is the direct entry point from the pedal brake, right? So the pedal brake goes into this valve and then goes up into this T to open these valves. This valve, you can see, has an electrical circuit tied on. That's because this valve is kept open only if certain conditions are met. So this, I believe the bus has to be in neutral, you have to have the brake engaged, and then probably various other like anti-child, like no child left behind things feed this line. So if the requirements for this are not met, then air pressure will not pass through this, and thus you will not get air pressure to your brake release, and then you won't be able to release your spring brakes. So this is where my issue lies. I have air pressure getting to this here. I pulled this line. When I press the brakes, air pressure spews out, but air pressure does not come out of this. There are two potential reasons. The first one being that this valve is broken and frozen. That's wholly possible. I haven't tested the voltage on this line yet, so that's possible. But the more likely thing is that I cut a wrong wire when I was pulling out stuff from the wiring in the bus, and therefore this cannot register its proper requirements, and it's not sending signal to open up this valve, and because of that I cannot release my spring brake system. Obviously it's very important to be aware of this when you are demoing your bus, because I've seen a lot of people talk about how if you cut the wrong wire, the bus won't start. And I was very careful about that. You know, I was going through my bus, cutting wires, making sure the bus still started, and the bus does still start. You know, it doesn't cause any issues on starting. The issue, obviously, is I can't move it because I can't release the spring brakes. And that is a big thing to be aware of, making sure that you're not cutting the wrong wire that won't allow you to release the spring brakes. I think, again, if anyone has more information about this, please tell me. I'm probably just going to end up bypassing that valve entirely. Again, the primary reason for that valve is to make sure that their proper conditions are met for you to release the spring brakes and drive away. If I bypass that valve, the condition that I need to press that pedal brake still exists, right? I can't move the bus if my pedal brake is not engaged. And the only other condition that I care about is making sure that I'm in neutral, which I can double check for every time I start the bus. So if I just direct connect those two lines, bypass that valve, then if I can only move the bus if I press the pedal brake, because pressing that pedal brake will still send air pressure to that valve and open up the delivery to the parking brake release valve, right? And if I don't have the if I don't have that pedal brake pressed, then there won't be pressure there, so on. So that's what I'm thinking. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone who knows better. But yeah, just keep an eye out, because obviously you want systems working the way that they're supposed to. Watch that things are working properly. The other thing is, make sure, again, that you're venting your air compressor tanks. There are many valves in there that could have been the issue if they had frozen over the winter because there was water in the lines. That could still be the case. I don't know. I won't know until I successfully get air pressure into that inversion system. So yeah, hopefully this information will help somebody. If it did, keep following my journey. I'm hoping to share a lot of information. I'm trying not to share everything that everyone's seen already, and more stuff that I can't find information on clearly on the internet. So if you have any more questions about my journey, leave comments. I'm happy to talk about stuff. I'm happy to show you what I've been working on, and yeah, good luck.